What is going on, everybody? It is so good to be back after a bit of a hiatus here through the holidays and through my move back here to Minnesota. As you can see, the first recording here in the new setup. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. I know there hasn't been a lot of content out here on the channel in recent weeks, but I am really ready to go full throttle here into the new year with playoffs, off-season changes, coaching carousel discussions, obviously the NFL draft picking up big time here. Lots of draft content coming very shortly here. So we are back. It is great to be back. And today I'm going to be taking my best crack at predicting the NFL playoffs. This is always a fun exercise. Sometimes it goes as you expect, and sometimes you look back on this and feel like a complete idiot. So, gonna take my best shot at predicting how the next few weeks are gonna play out with the NFL playoffs. Let's go ahead and get started as we dive in. If you could take just a second to hit that like button, it really does help me out. I really appreciate it. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of that coaching carousel discussion or the draft stuff just around the corner. Gonna be putting out a Shedeur Sanders film breakdown like I did with Cam Ward here, hopefully over the next week or so. So lots to look forward to. Make sure you're subscribed for that. But let's go ahead and get started. We are going to go in order of when these games are happening. And that, of course, is going to start with the 5 seed Los Angeles Chargers visiting the 4 seed Houston Texans. Two teams with entirely different vibes right now. You have the Texans, who had a massive amount of hype. A lot of people picked them to win the Super Bowl this year. They're kind of walking ass backwards into the playoffs. They haven't really been able to find their identity this season. Whereas the Chargers, they had their identity from the get-go, but a team that we didn't really expect much from at all. And they're getting better as the season goes on. Their offense has really kind of woken up in the last 2/3 of the season, and this defense has been really the surprise of this team for the year under Jesse Minter and that defensive staff. So with that, the Chargers are actually favorites in this game on the road, and I don't entirely disagree with that. This, I do think, is going to be a very good football game, though, and this, to me, boils down to one specific critical variable in this game, and that is how the Houston Texans can handle the Chargers' blitzing attack. The Texans' offensive line has been a nightmare trying to pick up any sort of stunt or blitz this season. Any Texans fan or person that's paid attention to the Texans this year has certainly felt that. In fact, they are 27th in the NFL in offensive EPA per play against the blitz in the second half of this season. It's just been a complete Achilles heel for this offense. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, you are looking at literally the most effective, efficient blitzing team in the NFL by a pretty significant margin. The Chargers are number 1 in the NFL in EPA added per play when they blitz, and it's nearly double the next team down. Now, they only blitz the 16th most in the league, but when they do blitz, they catch you off guard. They bring this sort of Mike McDonald approach where they could be in any number of fronts and coming from any different direction. You never know where they're coming from, and they are as good as anybody in the league. In fact, number 2 is Mike McDonald's Seattle Seahawks. So that system, by the way, is definitely working. That, to me, is where this game is going to be decided, because I think CJ Stroud is just fine when he's not under pressure. And even when he is under pressure, he has done some really special stuff in improvisational situations to extend plays, find his guy Nico Collins, where they have a really special connection. And I wouldn't be surprised if they can just pick up the damn blitz if they have more success on offense than you might expect. Now, Vegas is not expecting a ton of offensive success in this game. The over-under is 43.5, which is, by my math, the lowest of the week. Just kind of double-checking that. Yep, so this is the lowest over-under of this weekend. And I think that's fair. So if the Texans are going to win this game, it's going to have to be going back to the drawing board and figuring out, Bobby Slowick and company, figuring out how the hell to fix this really overnight, because they haven't been able to fix it all season. And frankly, I'm not willing to bet that they can get that fixed. It's just been so eye-opening this year. So that's the big thing I'm watching in this game. And then on the flip side, that's a great matchup as well. This Texans defense, While it's been, I would just say up and down. I think their last big game against the Chiefs, they just didn't really live up to what I was hoping from them in that game. It felt like they had maybe turned a corner in the second half of the year, so I don't think they're fully there yet as a unit under D'Amico Ryan's defense, but they have had some really special performances. You think back to what they did against the Miami Dolphins. Can the Texans just come out and find a way to dominate these receivers, which they should be able to do that? What do they plan to do with Ladd McConkey? Do they do something with Derek Stingley that they don't traditionally do to force the Chargers to beat them, with Johnston and some of these other guys? I think the Texans have an opportunity to win this game on that side of the ball as well, which plays into that low over-under that we talked about. So this really should be a good game. The main thing as we revisit that side of the ball, the Chargers offense versus the Texans defense, is that the Chargers are uniquely equipped, I think, to handle this Texans defense, because to me, the Texans defense butters their bread with those two edge rushers. And as long as Rashawn Slater plays in this game, which I think he will, they took him out in what felt like a bit of a precautionary, pregame pull week 18 for the Chargers against the Raiders. As long as those two tackle duo, that tackle duo out there with Slater and Joe Alt, I think that's a group that can at least slow down Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, so that the Chargers can do what they need to do offensively, which might not need to be a ton, given what we said about how the Chargers defense matches up. So I am going to lean Chargers in this one. The favorites on the road, the 5 seed knocking off the 4 seed, winning this one in a tight one, 23-20. Then for our next game, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers visiting the Baltimore Ravens. It feels like the inevitable Thanos meme. It always comes back to me with Ravens Steelers. What a classic battle this has been over the last couple of decades. These two teams split this season, but obviously the most recent meeting, the Ravens dominated. Lamar was phenomenal. The Ravens had a surprising amount of success running against this Steelers defense that is traditionally very good against the run. And Zay Flowers ran free against the Steelers, whose offense just couldn't keep pace without George Pickens in that game. Now, things have changed a little bit here. The Steelers have George Pickens in this game. The Ravens might not have Zay Flowers. So can that maybe bridge this back a little bit closer to the first time these two teams met? I think that's a fair reaction to that injury. And it's tough because we don't know Zay Flowers' status right now. It doesn't sound great. And even if he does go, he's a guy that, lateral agility, change of direction is just such a big part of his game. With a lower body injury, I'd be worried that he'd be 100%. And he really was special in that game against the Steelers the last time these guys played. So to me, the 9.5-point spread feels a little bit ridiculous. The third meeting between these two incredibly well-coached teams, I just think before you get into the bad blood stuff, the gap's going to be a little bit more narrow. But talking about this being a big division rivalry playoff game, I just don't see this being a blowout. I am going to pick the Ravens, obviously the heavy favorites in this game. I think Lamar has just reached a new level as a passer of the football. I think that came through the last time the Steelers played. Another big thing to look for here is the Ravens' maybe biggest Achilles heel is the right side of that offensive line has just at times shown up as an issue. But to Roger Rosengarten's credit, he has had some of his best games of the season against TJ Watt. When you look at Rosengarten's skill set, it's not terribly surprising because Watt's not, as great as he is, he's not really a power rusher. And Rosengarten's anchor is his issue. He's actually been able to come out and kind of match the technique approach of a TJ Watt and the athleticism of a TJ Watt. So that's been a matchup that's been okay for the Ravens. And I think that plays a factor in Lamar having time to throw and attacking a Steelers secondary that has really struggled as of late. Even if Zay Flowers isn't 100%, Rashad Bateman has really stepped up in the last month. So I am going to take the Ravens. I think they are favorites for a good reason, especially at home here. But I do think this will be tighter than that 10-point spread indicates. All right, then we have another AFC game. It's kind of interesting how they're going all AFC, and then we get the NFC this weekend. But the Denver Broncos visiting the Buffalo Bills. It's been a very commendable playoff caliber season for the Broncos. Just completely slammed the door on teams like Miami and Cincinnati, who just weren't as consistent throughout the course of the season as the Denver Broncos, and they lock up a playoff spot for good reason. I mean, this has been a very legitimate playoff team that people, myself included at times, have kind of poked fun at and said they're not really in the same caliber of these other playoff teams. And I think that's more of an embodiment of how this season has ended up. This season has had these extremes where you've got these super high-end teams. Most of the good teams are winning 11, 12, 13, 14 games. And then you have 10 horrible teams competing for the number one pick. So Denver, on an average season, is about the 14th best team in the league. But they are probably a tick behind most of these playoff caliber teams in the framework of this season. So it's been an interesting year for Denver, but they rightfully find themselves here. I'm taking the Bills to win this game. I don't think the Bills, who have had a really special season, I just don't think that their playoff run is going to stop here in the first round at home against this Broncos team. And the Bills are 2-score favorites in this game, 8.5-point spread in this game. Now, if Denver is going to find a way to pull off the upset here, I don't think it's very likely, but I think their path to victory is going to come from their defense. They have quietly been a really good defense, especially in terms of the run defense. Vance Joseph has those guys, I believe, third in run defense DVOA and second in rushing EPA defense. That is going to be their path. Just try to make the Bills one-dimensional. The Bills are second in rushing EPA and number one in passing EPA. This has really turned into an unstoppable, dynamic two-way offense. So if you're Denver and you can find a way to slow down the run, as they've done to a lot of teams this season, then you can maybe get a little bit crazy with Vance Joseph and the blitzes and try to throw off Josh Allen in the passing game if they have to get a little bit one-dimensional. Can you take Pat Surtain and follow around Amari Cooper and take everybody else and try to take away the quick passing game that's been so effective? It's going to have to come on that side of the ball. I just don't think Bo Nix, with this offensive group, is going to get into a high-scoring affair and go pound for pound, punch for punch with Josh Allen in Buffalo. I think that's just asking too much of the kids. So, again, I'm taking the Bills. I've got this 28-20. Not going to get too creative here. And really, it's been a great season for Denver, and I'm excited to see them kind of continue to build things so that hopefully in a year or two, we are talking about them in the light that we're talking about the majority of these other playoff teams. Before I do go to my next game, if you already miss fantasy football and you're looking for a way to maximize your interest in all of these playoff games, Underdog Fantasy has got you covered. Not only can you play their pick'em contest for all of these playoff matchups with the chance at massive payouts if you select the right player stats, but you can also hop in and do one of my personal favorites, Playoff Best Ball. You can scratch that itch to do a fantasy draft right now, compete for a chance at massive payouts, and not just put your individual player knowledge to the test, but you've also got to pick the best players on the best teams that are going to go the furthest in the playoffs. It is a really unique format. It's one of my favorite ways to play fantasy football, and Underdog is the best place to play it. We've only got 4 more weeks of football left, so make sure you are enjoying the absolute most out of it with Underdog. And right now, if you sign up using code TFG, not only will you support my channel in the process, they will give you a bonus match up to $1,000. That is plenty of extra money to carry into NBA, NHL, MLB, and into off-season best ball, next year's pick'em contest, whatever it is you're looking to do at Underdog, you can get that bonus match and more room to play. So that's code TFG at Underdog, and let's keep going. So your AFC wild card is set. Let's move on to the NFC. The first game we've got to talk about here is the Green Bay Packers visiting the Philadelphia Eagles. One of these two teams' seasons is going to end where it began, way back week 1 in Brazil. A lot has changed about these two teams since then, really specifically on the defensive side of the ball. I think both these defenses have come a long way. We saw Vic Fangio's defense take a few weeks to really set in to the point where they've been one of the best defenses in the league now for the better part of the season. And Green Bay, I think, has shown a lot of growth under Jeff Hafley's defense that really didn't know what they were doing quite yet in week 1. So it's tough to put too much stock into that first meeting, but I do think there's something to be said about how the Eagles just do have so much more star talent than the Packers. I think you look at the Packers games and just historically at playoff games in general, when you get into these kind of playoff caliber matchups, and a lot of the Packers' losses have come against the top teams in the NFC, 2 against Detroit, 2 against Minnesota, 1 against Philadelphia, and then 1 more recently against the Bears with backups in there. But when you get into these tough matchups against these premium teams, when push comes to shove, do you have a superstar that can win a one-on-one and get you a bucket? I think we all agree the Packers are a really good team, incredibly well coached. They scheme things up. They play hard. They've got a great culture, but they don't have an A.J. Brown to just moss a defensive back. They don't have necessarily a Jalen Carter, if you can get him one-on-one, to just dominate on that side of the ball, or certainly the guys in the secondary that Philadelphia has to contest throws and make a 3rd-and-1 slant challenging on an opponent. Green Bay, just from a roster perspective, unfortunately isn't there yet. They haven't taken that leap, and it looked like maybe they had a few weeks ago, but unfortunately for Green Bay, they just are not rolling into the playoffs at 100%, both mentally and physically speaking. A few weeks ago, when they were coming off of blowout wins against Miami and San Francisco, it was looking like, okay, can they get a couple of the guys that can make a difference for them? Christian Watson, while he's not A.J. Brown, when he's on, he is a difference maker, and he's going to be out. Jair Alexander out for the season. That's going to be a lot for the Packers to overcome here against possibly the most talented roster and the most healthy roster in the NFL right now in Philadelphia. We'll see what Jalen Hurts looks like. He hasn't played in 3 weeks, coming off a concussion. That's probably the biggest factor in this game. One thing I want to see from the Packers, they are actually a pretty effective blitzing team, but they don't blitz as much as they should. They are 26th in the NFL in blitz rate. I don't want to see the Packers come out and try to just, play quote-unquote vanilla, just play one-on-one defense against this Eagles offense. I think you have to play aggressive, stop the run on the way to the quarterback, load up the line, force Jalen Hurts to beat you with his arm. I think he's got a good chance of doing that with these receivers against this secondary, but at least muddy things up, because if they come out and just rush for, play too high, I do think the Eagles are going to run all over this team. You're talking about a Packers linebacking core that they're athletic, they're talented, they have their splash plays, but I really don't think they know what they're looking at in terms of defending a dynamic run game like this, and are going to have a hard time getting to the ball carrier. So I just want to see the Packers come out with a good game plan defensively, maybe take a book out of what Todd Bowles and some of these other great coordinators have done to try to attack this Eagles offense and just see if it works. We'll see, though, if that's how they want to go about things. And then for the Packers offense, and just the Packers overall, they've got to clean up these idiotic mental mistakes. The last 2 weeks against the Vikings and the Bears, they've lost both of these games. Just stupid mistakes, right? Fumbles, pre-snap penalties, special teams gaffes. Maybe that can be a reality check at the right time for this Packers team, or maybe it shows up to hurt them. You can't go into Philadelphia and fumble the ball. The last 2 weeks, this team has had critical fumbles in the first half that has really set them behind the 8 ball in terms of winning those matchups. You're not going to be able to do that in Philadelphia, so they got to clean that stuff up. If they can, I think they can have some success against a Fangio-style defense that they practiced against for a long time, going against Joe Barry's defense. So should be a good game. The spread on this one is 4.5. I think Green Bay has a way to win this game, as we talked about, but they got to come out with a good game plan. They got to come out and not make mistakes. Tough to bet on them to do that in Philadelphia against this dynamic, loaded roster. I'm going to take the Eagles to win this one, 28-21. Okay, next up, we have a really great battle between the 6-seed Commanders and the 3-seed Tampa Bay Bucks. Two of the most high-flying, dynamic offenses in the NFL, going against a pair of defenses that just haven't been very good this year, especially in terms of Washington, but Todd Bowles' defense has not been what we've gotten used to over the years either. So with that, this is the highest over-under of the weekend, 50.5 points projected in this game, and I agree with that. Really excited to see Jaden Daniels in his first playoff game. how does he show up against, man, as much as we just criticize the Bucs defense, Todd Bowles has put up some pretty diabolical defensive performances and is, in my mind, still one of the better game plan specific defensive coordinators in the league. That to me is where this game is going to be decided. Even if the types of fronts and coverages they run can vary, the Bucs have two very specific goals, and typically in a big game, they're going to accomplish at least those two things. That is, stop the run and blitz the daylights out of you. I do think that's the right mentality to attack this Cliff Kingsbury, Jaden Daniels offense that does use a lot of the read option and play action, just move north and south and get after the quarterback and stop the run on the way to the quarterback with heavy fronts. I like that matchup for the Bucs. And Bowles in this defense, we've seen what they've done against, for example, the Eagles over the years. It's a great example, but schematically speaking, they do a really good job at kind of tricking the quarterback into keeping the ball on these read options and then having Levante David as a scrape exchange linebacker looping back over and really shutting down the run in that way. So it's going to be a big test for Jaden Daniels against this defense. I think he's going to have success because he's just that good. And the Commanders are 7th in the NFL against the blitz. I do think they're going to get theirs and have some big plays against this Bucs defense. So that's not to say this is anything close to a lock. On the other side, though, I'd be worried about this Commanders defense. The one thing they have going for them is you do have Marshawn Lattimore hopefully going to get out there. We'll see if he can make it all the way through the game. But against a very familiar foe in Mike Evans. And over the years, that matchup has typically gone to Marshawn Lattimore. So that's going to be a big deal in this game. If you can take away Mike Evans, you maybe can slow down the Bucs passing game. But even then, you're talking about a Bucs offensive line that has really emerged as one of the premium O-lines in the league. Jaquan McMillan has really emerged in recent weeks as a real playmaker for this team. And Baker coming off a heater last week where he woke up at the right moment and showed that he is hungry with this Bucs team. So I don't love the way the Commanders are going to match up against the Bucs, especially when you talk about the Bucs being a dynamic offense that can run the ball better than you might think. We talked about that offensive line, but Bucky Irving's been a real problem for opponents. The Commanders are something like 26th, 27th against the run this year on defense. They just don't have the bodies on that side of the ball. So I do think the roster talent of the Bucs will shine through in this game. I'm going to pick the Bucs to win, but hard to write off Jaden Daniels with the level of quarterbacking he's bringing to the table and what the highs of this offense have looked like at times this season. This should be an excellent game, but I'm going Bucs 27-23. And then our final wild card game, and we're spending more time on these wild card matchups because we know for sure that these games are happening. There's no guarantee that I'm right about any of these picks. But the 14-win, 5-seed Minnesota Vikings visiting the only team outside of Detroit that was able to beat the Vikings this season in the Los Angeles Rams. And ironically, that was, famously, it's become famous, at least for those paying attention, teams the week after playing Detroit have lost, like, pretty much every time. I don't know where the record's at now. I haven't kept track of it over the last 2 weeks, but teams were up to like 1-11 the week after playing the ass-beating Detroit Lions. Here we are again. The Vikings have to play the Rams after playing the Vikings. This time around, a little bit more rest, though. The last time, it was a Thursday night football game. They had 3 days of rest. This time, it's Monday night. They have at least 8 days of rest. So is that a factor? A little bit more time in the ice bath to bring it physically? I don't know. Not to put too much emphasis on that, but I honestly think that matters. So I wanted to bring that up. But the Vikings are 1.5-point favorites this time around. This is the closest spread of the week and should be a battle. The biggest thing I'm looking for here is how Minnesota's defense with Brian Flores kind of comes back with a counterpunch for what the Rams did against this team. You got to think back to when these two teams played. This was at a turning point in the season for the Vikings defense. They had been dominant all season long, and then both the Lions and Rams kind of found a formula against their blitz-heavy attack to really use motion and attacking the intermediate part of the field to really exploit some of these pre-snap looks, the aggressive blitzing tendencies of these Brian Flores defenses that were either taking away the short pass or having these guys retreat to protect the deep ball. And at that point in the season, what both the Lions and Rams discovered was if we just run in breakers and 15-yard outs, there is nobody in that area to defend our passing game. And you had smart quarterbacks that could recognize and attack the blitz in Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford. The Vikings have learned a lot as a defense since then. They've become a much more man-heavy defense at times. And Brian Flores, being the defensive guru that he is going to make adjustments and is not going to bring the same game plan that the Rams were able to exploit last time. So I think that's just going to completely shake things up and present different problems for the Rams that they may or may not be ready to beat. I do think running more man coverage against this defense could bring some success. As good as Puka and Cooper Kupp are, they're not dominant one-on-one separators. And Stafford's not a guy that's really going to kill you with scrambles. So do we see more man coverage in this matchup than we saw the first time around? Definitely something to look for. In that Week 8 meeting, the Vikings ran man coverage 2 times in the entire game. So that's what I'm looking for, man. If they come out with the same game plan, I think the Rams have a lot of success against zone coverage, against the blitz, and perhaps find a way to win this game. But at the same time, the Rams offense has actually really struggled the last month, enough so that I don't really understand why this spread is so tight against a Vikings team that I do consider an excellent football team, a true Super Bowl contender that's just coming off a really bad week in Detroit. But, you know, the Rams played their backups week 18, but the last 3 weeks before that, 13 points, 19 points, 12 points. Obviously, you go back a month ago, they put up 42 against the Bills, so we know any given Sunday what this team is capable of, but they haven't really hit their groove with Matthew Stafford. It's been a heavy dose of Kyren Williams getting something like 25 carries a game and a bunch of Puka Nacua screens. I don't really think Brian Flores and his defense are going to have a problem with that sort of a game plan, so we'll see really what the Rams offense is capable of. I'm much less worried about the Vikings offense unless Sam Darnold looks like he did last week. That's the big deal. I mean, he came out against Detroit and just the moment looked too big for him. He looked like he was jittery, he was fired up, and as a result, all of his passes against Detroit were just sailing over everybody's head. They had receivers open. I don't love the Rams defense. I like the Rams defense. I think Shula has done a great job with that unit. They scheme up their pass rush really well. Jared Verse is a problem, but the Vikings do carve up zone coverage, and the Rams run about as much zone as anybody because they don't have cornerbacks to play man coverage. Detroit had a ton of success playing press man coverage. That's not the world the Rams want to live in. So I do think the Vikings have plenty of success offensively, and with a different game plan on defense, they'll be able to slow down this Rams offense that has struggled as of late. I like the Vikings a lot this week. And for my bettors out there, this is my favorite bet to get the Vikings under a field goal at a 1.5. I've got this game going 27-20 with the Vikings winning and advancing into a rematch against Detroit. All right, so now probably going to spend a little bit less on these games because they may or may not happen depending on how accurate my picks are. I do like to always remind people the NFL does reseed. I always get people in the comments of this video every year saying, idiot, you got the bracket wrong. And I'm like, nope, the NFL reseeds. You don't just follow the ladder like some other playoff formats. But with that, let's go over to the AFC and start with the Chiefs, the 1 seed now hosting the division rival Los Angeles Chargers. Third meeting, obviously, between these two teams. The Chiefs have looked much more like the Chiefs of old in the last month of the season. They've really seemingly kind of trekked along this season, experimented, reminds me a lot of the late stage San Antonio Spurs, the New England Patriots dynasty, kind of playing with their food a little bit, but when they need to, turning it on. And Mahomes has been fantastic. They've really opened things up offensively with DeAndre Hopkins, and really an emergence of Xavier Worthy. Hollywood Brown is back into the lineup. That offense, much more firepower than we saw in the first 2/3 of the season. We know what this Chiefs defense is capable of. So With that, I am going to pick the Chargers' run to come to an end. The Chargers are way ahead of schedule, winning a playoff game in the first year with Harbaugh, but a lot of holes on that roster. You can break down the X's and O's, but in this one, I think it's a Jimmy's and Joe's type of game where the Chiefs are the team that has Mahomes and Chris Jones and playoff Travis Kelce to be just too much for the Chargers to handle. Next year, though, we'll see. This could turn into a much more heated matchup with another offseason for the Chargers to load things up. I've got this one a good game, though, 24-20 between familiar opponents. Then a monster round 2 meeting between the Baltimore Ravens and the Buffalo Bills. These two teams met way back in week 4 and was a blowout. The Ravens won 35-10 in that game. I don't think that's going to happen again. The Bills have shown over the course of the season that they are just too damn good of a football team to let that happen, especially this time being in Buffalo with the crowd behind them. I don't know who to pick in this game. This to me is a complete coin toss game. Two quarterbacks with obviously like the battle of the MVPs and all that stuff. I wish we could just wait for this matchup to determine the MVP in this season's case. It's obviously not going to be what we do, but I hate to oversimplify this matchup, but this to me is a coin toss game that comes down to which quarterback can make more plays than the other. And in the case of these two quarterbacks with the level that these two guys are playing at, pick your poison, man. I mean, seriously, I don't mean to be lazy about the analysis in this game. I don't. But that is what matters in this game. I think these two defenses are very solid, very well coached, very fine, solid. I don't think they're going to be able to do enough on either side to slow down the opponent's offense. Both these teams have really good offensive line, great run games. It's a very evenly matched game. It's just going to come down to who misses a throw there, who makes a bad read here, who can make that spectacular play when inevitably an offensive lineman loses, who can avoid the sack, get out of pressure, make that huge throw down the field. It's going to come down to that. In this situation, if I got to flip a coin, I will go with the home team and a team that I think has been just a little bit more reliable than the other by a slim margin, and that is the Buffalo Bills. It's not a slight to you Ravens fans, and I'll say this, if you win this game, I would be taking you to go to the Super Bowl and potentially win it, because I do think Lamar in this offense has been that good. But I had to pick one. I was going to end up jobbing the other fan base one way or another, but I'm gonna lean Bills ever so slightly here. I've got it 34-31. Hope we get this game, and I think we will get this game. It's gonna be an absolute bloodbath. All right, then let's go to the NFC, a rematch of what we saw last week, and I do think this game would be much, much closer in a rematch, especially because you would think Sam Darnold in this scenario has gotten the monkey off his back and can settle down a little bit. Although, I don't know. I mean, it was pretty eye-opening. He hadn't looked like that all season long, and then all of a sudden he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. So, who knows? If he was making his throws in that game against Detroit, we are talking about an instant classic battle for the NFC North, though. Detroit just pulled away in the end as the Vikings defense got worn down. So again, expecting a much better game in this matchup. But one thing I do think we learned in that game is that the Vikings defense does not have answers for this Lions offense. They didn't in either matchup. They started strong, right? They got kind of a fluky, batted, screen pass interception. They did okay against the run early on. But the problem is the Vikings one-on-one ability, they don't really have a guy. And when you talk about the Lions offensive line, especially as the game went on, they did wear down that Vikings defensive line that has contributed to one of the top run defenses in the league. So they can't really hang their hat on that. And where the Vikings are dynamic as a pass defense is when they can blitz. And the Lions are probably the best offense against the blitz in the league. They have so many answers with Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's a quick one-on-one beater from the slot. You've got Jahmyr Gibbs out of the backfield. You have Sam Laporta. It's not a coincidence he came alive against the Vikings defense. You have the experienced Jared Goff, who sees things incredibly quickly and very well against the blitz and will happily take what's there quickly against the blitz. I do worry about the Vikings defense in this rematch. The one thing that could decide this is the refs. And I don't mean this as a slight to Detroit. I respect the style that they play with. But what we saw in this game, and I would assume they would come out with the same game plan because it really worked and was just them kind of kicking the teeth in of these Vikings wide receivers with press man coverage. They're just, by nature, when you play that style, there were a lot of plays that, depending on how the refs are seeing it and how they want to call it, you could end up with a bunch of flags, a bunch of automatic first downs, and in a game where theoretically Sam Darnold is throwing the ball more accurately, the Vikings offense might be able to overload this banged up Lions defense. So that is the Vikings' path to success. Darnold plays more accurately, and maybe the refs don't let the Lions play as physical as they did the other night. Impossible to know if that's going to be the case or not, though, at this point in time. So I am going to take the Lions, but I think this would be a much, much better matchup the second time around. And don't take it for granted that you're going to sweep the Minnesota Vikings, Detroit, because I do think a rematch would be a much better battle. All right, then we have the worst case scenario for the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe the one team that they don't want to play, the team that has had their number consistently in Todd Bowles' Buccaneers. This has been Jalen Hurts' Achilles heel, and I do think it's for a good reason. We talked about a lot of the stuff already that Todd Bowles does with scrape exchange blitzes that can take away the read option with a guy like Vita Vea and even a Kalijah Kancey, who's a real kind of chaos maker up front. Just the way that the Bucs play defense is a problem for the Eagles' run game and Jalen Hurts as a passer as well, because Jalen Hurts is not a good passer against the blitz. He's just not. It's kind of, where's A.J. Brown? Go make a play. Now, we'll see if the Bucs have enough members healthy in the secondary to match up against these guys. But in theory, that's another problem for this team too. If you have a healthy Jamel Dean, he is probably the stockiest corner in the league. That's a unique player against A.J. Brown. Zion McCollum's had a breakout season. His athleticism can be a problem for Devontae Smith. So this team is uniquely equipped to beat this team, not to mention if you're going to beat the Eagles' offensive line in the drop-back passing game, it is going to be to find a way through their interior. Yet again, that's where the Bucs win with Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey, who would be a really tough guy for someone like Mekhi Becton to get their hands on. So this is a really tough scenario. Eagles fans, I hate to tell you, you probably want to be cheering for the Commanders this weekend because I don't think you want to see the Bucs. Now, I do think the Eagles will be favored in this game. They are supremely talented. I do think their defense can pose plenty of problems to the Bucs offense. They just overwhelm teams with talent. But for the sake of kind of making a point that this would not be an easy matchup or a favorable matchup at all for the Eagles, and to shake things up a little bit because I have been a little bit chalky to this point, I'm going to pick the Bucs to win this game. Now, that's risky because the Bucs could get bounced by the Commanders in the first round, and this could look horrible. I understand that. But if things are going to play out like this, I could totally see this. And Baker, at this point, red hot. A red hot Baker Mayfield is a problem. So we're gonna get a little bit different here and take the Bucs, but this one would be neck and neck, flip a coin, a really tough game to predict. All right, then we have our conference championship games. The Bills, Chiefs, rematch number 500 seemingly at this point. Love this matchup, a rematch that we saw this season, and a game that the Bills did win and showed that they really have built this team in a way that can beat the Kansas City Chiefs, specifically with the Bills offense. I love the way they've crafted this thing. They've got all these man beaters, whether it's Kincaid or Khalil Shakir. You have Amari Cooper on the outside. You have Josh Allen himself is a man beater because of the run game, scrambling, but also in the design run game as well. He's such a threat. You've got James Cook out of the backfield. It's just really tough for the Chiefs to get into that format that they really like, where they can play physical man coverage in the playoffs and make things really challenging for you. The Bills showed in that first matchup the Chiefs can't really live in that world. And I do think the Bills are going to have plenty of success offensively because they have systematically designed this offense in a way that can attack these guys. Now, this time around, I do think Kansas City has more firepower to go head-to-head than we saw in the first matchup. And for that reason, I think this is going to come down to the wire and be a bit of a coin toss matchup. Xavier Worthy wasn't playing this well the last time they met. DeAndre Hopkins wasn't comfortable within this offense. Hollywood Brown was not healthy. Isaiah Pacheco, I don't think, was healthy. So they just have so much more dynamism on offense to match what should be a really fun, high-scoring game. For sake of long-term regression to the mean, I know the Chiefs have this black voodoo magic that seemingly they always find their way into the Super Bowl, but things have always gone against the Bills in this matchup. They missed the field goal last year that probably would have won them this game. They choke it away with 13 seconds left in that famous matchup. They don't get the coin toss to get the ball in overtime when the overtime rules were still the horrible overtime rules that we have during the regular season. Just for the sake of regression back to the mean and the meme of the Chiefs can't keep getting away with it, eventually I think someone's going to get Walter White here and the Bills are going to win. I don't have a ton of confidence in that because I do think the Chiefs are playing really, really well and have just as good of a chance to go back and win the Super Bowl as ever. But I am going to just lean with this being the Bills' year. And just overall, I do think they are a better, more complete team this year from start to finish. Though, again, what we've seen from the Chiefs the last few weeks is definitely scary. And then for your NFC Championship, this is a rematch of a game earlier this season, a game in which the Bucs did give the Lions just their second loss of this entire season. I'm not quite bold enough to pick a repeat of that game. I'm going to go Lions in this game. I think their offense can do enough against, again, a Bucs defense that just has been more down than up, but certainly up and down throughout the course of the season. I just don't think the Lions are going to get this far to lose this game at home. But if we did get this matchup, I do think the Bucs would put up a good fight, as we saw earlier this season, and maybe, just maybe, they could be the true Cinderella story. But we are going to send the Detroit Lions to the Super Bowl. All right, so our Super Bowl. Someone's going to win their first Super Bowl in their franchise. The Detroit Lions and the Buffalo Bills. I know what a lot of you guys are thinking. The Lions have nobody left on defense. Terrion Arnold got hurt against Detroit. Eventually, this has to catch up with them. To me, just as we saw in the last battle between these two teams, this is where I have the Lions' run coming to an end. I think this game's going to be very similar to the last time these two teams met, where I've got no worries about the offenses here. I think this is a complete shootout. But when push comes to shove, the Bills do have some playmakers left, right? Von Miller, Ed Oliver is a guy that can get you that interior pressure, which is how you can mess up the Lions' drop-back passing game. The Bills do just have their guys on what eventually is a side of the ball that matters at some point. And I think Detroit has shown incredible toughness, and their defense is not going to just roll over and die, but they kind of did the last time these two teams met. So I'm going to lean with this being a repeat of the last time these two teams met. And ultimately, with all due respect to Jared Goff, in the Super Bowl, the better quarterback making enough plays as the game goes on in Josh Allen to push through and get the Bills the first Super Bowl win in franchise history. So Buffalo Bills, I doubted you coming into the year. I didn't even pick you to win the playoffs, but I've come full circle with this team. The Lions on the other side of the ball were my Super Bowl pick heading into the year. So backing away from that a little bit with all these injuries piling up on the defensive side of the ball. But there you have it. Buffalo Bills are crowned that franchise guy Super Bowl champs. And now we get to find out if this whole thing goes to shit in about a week. But let me know what you guys think. Who are your Super Bowl champions? Where do you think my predictions are completely off base? Excited to see it all play out either way. Please do hit that like button on the way out. Make sure you subscribe because we've got lots of exciting content heading your way. And I'll see you soon. Peace out.